You want me to start? No. Welcome everyone. Just let you know, we'll just get started in a few minutes as we let a few more folks come on in. It looks like I think we can get started. I want to say hello to everyone. Thank you all for coming today. My name is Freddie Kay, and I'm a board member of JCRC. I want to welcome you to JCRC's speaker series and to this conversation about equity in education, featuring Boston City Councilor Andrea Campbell and Dr. Nasreen Hadad Haj'Yahya. I had the pleasure and honor of traveling to Israel with Councilor Campbell on a JCRC study tour in 2018. On the trip, we had the opportunity to not only tour major sites of Israel, but also to meet with elected officials, scholars, and regular folks, both Israeli and Arab. And we also got to know each other on the trip, which was wonderful. JCRC's Israel study tours focus on making connections between Boston and Israel so that we can learn from each other about shared issues like the one we will be discussing today. I look forward to hearing today's conversation. And now I will turn things over to today's moderator, Dina Kraft. Thank you, Dina.
Hi, everyone. So nice to be here. Boston is for me another home. I'm coming to you from Tel Aviv, but I lived in Cambridge for many years. So Boston is very close to my heart. We're here to talk to you today about this lost year of education that we are all living through across the globe. And it's a moment for us to look at what it looks like on the ground for both students in Boston's public schools and also what it looks like for Palestinian Arab citizens of Israel across the world. Now, in both communities, disparities in education were vast before the pandemic hit, and now things are arguably even more dire. And here to tell us what they have seen during this epic year are Councilor Campbell and Dr. Hadad Haj'Yahya, and they come from very different worlds, but they are also, there's lots of similarities and things we can also learn from one another. So I'd like to introduce you to Andrea Campbell, who was first elected to District 4 Boston City Councilor on November 3rd, 2015. And since then, Andrea has been a leader for equity, justice, and opportunity for all in Boston. As the first Black woman to serve as Boston City Council president from 2018 to 2020, she has championed an agenda that put racial equity at the top of Boston's priority list. And we also are very lucky to have with us today Nasreen Hadad Haj'Yahya, and she's the director of the Jewish Arab Relations Program at Israel's Democracy Institute. And she's a partner at the Portland Trust and a co-founder and a partner of NAS Consulting. She's a native of Ramla, which is a mixed Jewish Arab town in Israel, and an expert in the field of Arab-Jewish relations. Nasreen works to bridge socioeconomic gaps between Jewish and Arab citizens of Israel. In particular, she has formed an expertise on efforts to advance formal and informal education in Israel's Arab society, and to lift the socioeconomic profile of Arab youth, improve integration of Arab citizens into higher education and the job market, and increase representation of Arabs in Israel's civil service and decision-making circles. So please welcome me in hearing from both of our fine guests today. And we'll start with Councilor Campbell, please.
Thank you so much. And I know we're supposed to give some opening remarks and happy to, but I first just want to start from a place of gratitude. Thank you to JCRC for hosting the conversation. It's an honor to be on this panel with my esteemed international colleague, right, talking about issues of education, which are front and center right now. And of course, thank you for everyone for taking time out of your busy schedules today. I know how busy everyone is, for being a part of this conversation. And I'll tell folks a little bit about why I care so deeply about this issue, what I see the sort of current challenges are, and then looking forward, of course, to Q&A. Obviously, I'm Andrea Campbell, and I am the district counselor for District 4, which is largely Dorchester, Mattapan, and a little bit of Jamaica Plain and Rosendale. It is indeed an incredibly diverse district with, large immigrant communities, rich in history. But however, it is also where every inequity you could possibly imagine is alive and well, and probably most profound. And as you can imagine, COVID-19 has only continued to devastate families and businesses in this district and continue to exacerbate the inequities that existed long before COVID-19. And for me, this work of being an elected official and a public servant has always been in response to searching to fulfill my God-given purpose after the loss of my twin brother, Andre, who sadly died 9 years ago this year while in the custody of the Department of Correction, which oversees our prisons here in Massachusetts. He had a disease called scleroderma, and as a result of receiving inadequate health care, passed away while in that system when he was only 29 years old. And I ask one question that informs my work every single day, which is how do two twins born and raised in the city of Boston have such different life outcomes? And looking back, I know there are many systems that showed up differently for us, systems that allowed me to be successful and absolutely failed him. And Boston Public Schools is one of those systems. While I attended excellent Boston Public Schools, was on an advanced work track, had access to after school programs, great teachers, rigor, and excellent academics, Andre often was over-disciplined and under-supported by adults and those who failed to recognize his potential. And although he graduated from a Boston Public High School, the high school he attended wasn't even accredited at the time. And so I recognize that Boston Public Schools opened up many doors for me, but continues to fail thousands of Bostonians in the city of Boston today. And sadly, the disparities in access to a quality Boston public school is shocking. Families who live in downtown neighborhoods have an 80% chance of getting into a high quality Boston public school. If you live in Mattapan, where I live with my two beautiful boys, a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, you have a 5% chance of getting into a high quality Boston public school. And while our exam schools and exam high schools are some of the best public schools in the country, our system is failing thousands of students who don't attend those schools. Only 6 out of 10 students who don't attend our exam schools graduate from high school, and only 4 in 10 will graduate from college. And the pandemic has exposed these systemic and racial inequities that have existed, of course, in Boston for generations, including in access to a quality education. And the positivity rates, of course, that consistently have been higher in communities of color, in neighborhoods where a large majority of our BPS students live, we're seeing the digital divide be exacerbated and making it much more difficult for English language learners, special needs students, or students without proper technology, internet access, or software actually engage meaningfully in remote learning. So there's so much that we need to be doing, and there's so much that we can be doing. I absolutely believe that it is our job and responsibility to ensure all of our students have access to a high quality education. And I define that as birth to 12th grade, and that our students have diverse pathways that they can go through that are defined to reach their dreams and their full potential. And first and foremost, of course, the city's top priority is making sure our students get back to school in person and get back safely, and helping them make up, of course, for the learning loss this past year. And to do that, there are many things we can do to make that happen safely, including implementing weekly COVID-19 testing, ensuring our teachers get vaccinated and staff as well, ensuring all of our classrooms are equipped with proper PPE and ventilation, making sure that there is tutoring and mental health clinicians available to our students, as well as mental health clinicians available to our staff. But of course, while we push to get our students back, we can't take our eye off the ball, which is also to make sure that we are taking meaningful action right now to ensure long-term equity in our schools. And I'm committed to do that in various ways, including pushing for a more equitable assignment process, making sure every family has access to a high quality, affordable early education opportunity from birth to 5, making sure our high schools, of course, are redesigned in such a way that all of them are excellent and create pathways into all the jobs that are coming online in various industries, including the green economy and in the trades. And of course, making sure that we are building a diverse, consistent talent of BPS staff and leadership and teachers that reflect the students they serve, and making sure we're aligning curriculum in such a way that folks and our young students who go through our Boston Public Schools are learning a robust and rich history, not only about the world in which we live, but also about the history of the city of Boston. I'm committed to all of these things. And I know that when we work in partnership outside of silos, including with organizations like JCRC and many of you who are passionate about education, we can get this done in the city of Boston. I am really excited for the conversation today to talk about how we do just that, and really grateful to the organizers. It takes a lot of work behind the scenes to make this happen. So thank you to the organizers. And again, excited to be on the panel with my panelists, my co-panelists, I should say, and grateful for the work she continues to do as well. So thank you again for having me.
So I'd like to invite, hi. Thank you so much, Councilor Campbell. That was an amazing overview, and I'm looking forward to circling back to questions afterwards. And now we're gonna have Nasreen pop on the screen and tell us, have her give an overview of what she's been seeing on the ground in Israel.
Hey, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for having me. I feel really privileged to be here with you tonight. I apologize, English is my first language, and you're gonna hear a lot of English mistakes during this evening, so please accept my apologies. Thank you, Councilor, and I feel very privileged to be this evening, to be here with you this evening. As you heard, when we started this conversation, and when Dina presented me today, I work for the Israel Democracy Institute, and I work also as a partner in Portland Trust, and I have PhD from Tel Aviv University. And I succeeded to establish a consulting company with Ayman Saif and with Avivit Chai. And I believe that the majority of the citizens of Israel, especially the Palestinian one, look at me as a success story. But I want to take you to my childhood and where everything started. And I believe it could tell you a little bit about the complex situation that Arab citizens that live in Israel live in. And I'm going to take you for something that happened to me when I was 6 years old. And it was the first time that my grandfather took us out of Ramle. Ramle is a very poor city until today. And I grew up in a neighborhood called Ghetto because all the Arabs was concentrated there after the war of 48. And it was a very poor and a neighborhood that full with violence and full with drugs. And I remember my first memories from this neighborhood, and the majority of the youngest people there was addicted to drugs and addicted to unnormative and not, their life was not so normal. And when my grandfather took us out of the neighborhood for the first time when I was 6 years old, he took us to a demonstration and asked us to raise he asked us to raise slides that was written on 2 states for 2 people, and that happened in Kibbutz Gezer. And that time, it was my first time to see swimming pool and kids riding their bikes safely. And it was the first time that I've seen swimming pool and green fields. And I remember telling my grandfather at that demonstration that when I will grow up and when I will have children, I want to do it at Kibbutz Gezer. And my grandfather, that was a very unique person that did all what he done a lot to try to build bridges between Jews and Arabs in Israel after the war, looked at me and told me that only Jews can live at the kibbutz, and we are not allowed to. Actually, he told me I'm not allowed to dream to build my home and to be part of the kibbutz, because there are levels in the state of Israel. Jews can be wherever they want, and Arab people are very limited. And I looked at him at that time, at the age of 6, and I promised myself that when I will grow up and I will have children, I won't ever say such a sentence. I won't make their glass ceiling low. And today I have 3 daughters, Carmel, Hala, and Neil. And Carmel is 16 years old. And 10 years ago, when I was writing my PhD, my supervisor went to the state for half a year, and he gave me every 4 weeks half an hour for supervising the PhD. And one of the times Carmel was sitting next to me, and I asked her to be quiet. And when I finished my call with my supervisor, she told me that "Mommy, I know why you asked me to be quiet. You didn't want your supervisor to know that you are Arab, because when I talk in Hebrew, people cannot know if I'm Arab or Jews." And she was sure that if he will know, they will kick me out. He will kick me out from university. And she used a very hard word that I cannot. I don't believe that there is a specific and exact word that I can't translate to you what she said. But I believe that as Carmel thought at that time, 10 years ago, that the sky is there is a very low glass ceiling for Arab children, and she understands that to be an Arab in the state of Israel is to fight for everything. Although we are teaching her and her sisters in every day that if you want to achieve something, you need to work hard. But we all know in the reality of the state of Israel, to work hard, it's not enough. If you are Arab, or if you are part of the wrong group, your possibilities are are much fewer, and your even your capability of dreaming and your capability of building a future here is very limited. So what I'm doing today at the Israel Democracy Institute and at the Portland Trust, and also in my own consulting company, I try to help, and I try to bridge the gaps between Jews and Arabs, between the state of Israel and between my population, because I believe that without trust and without building trust between the two communities and between my community and the state of Israel, we will suffer from a lot of problem. And the main one today, from yesterday and till today, we have lost 3 of our youngest people. One of them the murders happened in Tamra at the north, and a student that was studying for his exam was killed by mistake, and a lot of problems that we suffer from relating to the way that the state of Israel deal with us and deal with our problem. And I'm trying to help the people that sitting around the table and taking the decision to understand how to deal with our problems. Dina, I think I will stop here, and if there are any questions, I'll love to answer.
Great. Well, thank you so much. That was a really interesting tour of things, including your personal story. I really appreciate you sharing that. I'd like to follow up with a question about the Arab school systems. I think a lot of people, listening in, even inside Israel, it's confusing. The Arab school system is separate and distinct from the Jewish school system. And on the one hand, that sounds like, wow, like total segregation. We all know that separate but equal doesn't work from the American example. But in the Israeli context and story, from what I understand, originally the school systems were developed because both communities, Arab and Jewish, wanted the school systems to be separate, and also physically and geographically they're separate. But can you tell us a little bit how it works, what it looks like, and what are the problems of being essentially, a very separate system?
First, I would like to say that we have 4 separated education systems in Israel.
Right.
We have one for the ultra-Orthodox community, and one for the religious Zionist, and one for the secular. And the fourth one, of course, serves the Arab population. And within the Arab education, we have different streams. We have the private school, which I study in, and this is the reason that I'm here with you today. And we have, of course, the public system, and it's very poor one. I will talk about it later, but it's have a lot of problem and issues that need to be solved. And there is one small stream that it's almost does not exist, and it's a common school for Jews and Arabs. For example, in Neve Shalom, we have elementary school that students started from their even when they are in the kindergarten, they study together. They look about each other as people, not as Jews or Arabs. And but the state of Israel fight very hard in those schools. It's not. The state does not try
encourage
to make it larger and in different areas.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that, yeah, there's the example at Neve Shalom and Wahat al-Salam, but there's also the example of the hand-in-hand schools that are a network of these Jewish Arab schools around the country. I host a podcast called The Branch that tells the stories of Jewish and Palestinian Arab citizens working together. And one of the episodes focuses on the schools there. And what's amazing is that they're huge waiting lists to get into these schools. They're incredibly popular. People really are hungry and yearning to study together. And it's proved itself to be a wonderful model. So, here's hoping more of that happens in the future. But thank you for sort of clarifying that very confusing landscape of these different school systems. And if we can, two things, I'd like to invite Councilor Campbell back on screen, back on the videos with us. And the other thing is, if those of you listening out in the wide world, if you could put your questions as well into the Q&A, into the chat, so we can get to your questions, that would be great. I wanted to ask you, Councilor Campbell, hearing Nasreen's story, which in some ways parallels partially your personal story, obviously some different contexts. I'm wondering if you have any questions for her about, her experience growing up. Also, you're two women who've kind of come out in your families and had different experiences. I was wondering if there's something you wanted to ask her about her schooling. I know, for example, when she graduated from high school, her parents didn't have money to send her to school, and she ended up going to university in her own stead. But what would you like to know from her about her education?
Yeah, no, I thank you for the question. I will tell you, of course, it just listening made me think about, being in Israel and the trip a group of electeds took with JCRC and what we learned about the educational system and the bright spots and how the context and the backdrop in many ways is different with some deep division and divide, but then how people are overcoming that, right, in creative ways. So I just wanted to reflect on it. It's a powerful story for sure. I think, well, I guess one question, if I had a question, is, we talk about how significant education is, right? I often say, but for the grace of God, or the education I got in Boston public schools, I wouldn't have went to an Ivy League college. Not only would I have not made it into a Princeton University, I wouldn't have been successful going through that university or successful in life. And one of the things I struggle with is, oftentimes, if you look at polls that people do, they say, oh, education is 5% of the issues that are of significance to residents or people, right? And I just say, are you kidding me? We know how important education is. So I guess it's a twofold question. One is how you speak about what your education meant to you personally, how it helped you sort of overcome your circumstance. Because I tell folks often, we're not going to eradicate poverty overnight. We're not going to eradicate violence and division overnight. So how you speak to that. And then on the other side, how you continue to make it an issue that is always at the forefront for folks to be grappling with. Right now you have thousands taking to the streets on policing reform. I often say, stay in the streets when it comes to educational inequities, right? And we should be marching around the inequities that exist. So how do you also at the same time make sure that this issue is front and center in policy discussions and other spaces as well? I guess is a question I have.
Wow, two complicated questions, but the first, I would like to start with your first question. I have two brothers, Amir and Muhammad, and both of them did not succeed to finish high school. Both of them went to the public system, and the majority of our boys, male, that go to the public systems, they don't have the privilege to end 12 years and to finish high school. And I was fortunate to go to public school, and it's not about only the education that I got, but I got hugs from my teachers. I got love, and people I remember that my teachers was all the time whispering in my ears and told me that they believe in me. And that was very powerful. And even when grades were not that high, But when people believe in you, and I'm sorry.
You make me cry. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. It gave me goosebumps. The same. That's right.
And I believe that they are the only reason that I succeed. And I succeeded to establish all what I've been doing for the last 20 years. And for your second question, I think that the Palestinian minorities, the Arabs in Israel, are very frustrated, and they don't believe that they have the ability to change anything. So people do go out to street. People believe that no matter what we will do, the state of Israel won't change. But because and for me, I'm raising here 3 daughters. I have 3 girls, and I want to make sure that when I will leave this world, I can promise them a better place. I don't want them to suffer, and I don't want them to do the hard work that I've been doing the last 8 years. I want the road to be much easier, and I want them to be. I want my daughter to be the minister of. To work as a minister, to work in the Ministry of Education, to work as in political position. I don't want her to understand and to believe that the glass ceiling is low, and I don't want her to believe that she could not be in whatever she wants. And unfortunately today, we know that the Arab minority don't have a political representation in the Israeli government. People don't see us as a legitimate partners, although we are. We serve in the education system. We serve as in the pandemic. The Arab doctors were stars, but unfortunately, when we talk about the political level, we are not good enough, and that's something that I won't ever accept because I love, it's my homeland. I don't have any other place, and I fight for it to make it better, not only for my daughters and for Arab children. I believe that when the state of Israel will be more equal, it will be good not only for Arabs, it will be good for all of us. And I know a little bit about Judaism, and I know that it's very different from what people here are trying to sell us, that we are not equal in our homeland.
Right. So Nasreen, you touched on so many interesting points, and yes. I think about the equality issue and about COVID, and we've seen it's a really remarkable moment, I think, for Palestinian Arab citizens in Israel, because with COVID, as you mentioned, Arab doctors have been on the front lines of fighting COVID. You've had, the disproportionately high number of Arab citizens, their numbers are doctors, nurses, pharmacists, risking their lives. You have stories of ultra-Orthodox men dying in the hospital, and an Arab nurse, putting tefillin on him, putting his prayer boxes on him for his last prayers, basically. And these amazing sort of moments of coming together. But at the same time, you have Arab citizens, including doctors. There was actually a public campaign saying, "We were with you, helping you on the front lines of COVID. Don't forget us when it's time to elect us to have a position of power and a voice." And for the very first time in Israeli history, you have politicians on the right, the left, and the center now courting the Arab vote in our 4th election in 2 years, which is coming up in March. So it'll be interesting. And obviously there's a lot of parallels, obviously, to the organizing of the African-American vote in America, especially in this last election. So there's things, but I wanted to ask you guys to shift a bit, specifically on education on the ground. The digital divide is a really big problem. I know there's lots of numbers thrown out. I know yesterday on the news in Israel, the education minister was bragging about how wonderful Israel's done in remote learning. And the journalists said, but wait, I understand that 40% of Arab children in Israel don't have access to computers at home. So how can you call it a success? So I wanted to know, maybe we'll start with you, Councilor Campbell. What does a digital divide look like in the Boston public city schools? Are there kids that are just not getting any education right now because they can't get online? And
That's
then if
right.
Nasreen, you can tell what's happening on the Arab sector in Israel with computers.
No, that is real, and there is a major digital divide in the city of Boston, and whether it is our students, and a large majority of them who do not have access to Chromebooks or the hardware, also do not have access to software and don't have a connection. That also includes even our elders and our seniors who rely on, of course, the internet to try to stay connected or to participate in a telehealth appointment, right? We're also seeing the digital divide show up with respect to our workers who can't participate in sort of a remote job, right, experience, or if they've lost their job, they can't find another one because they don't have these connections, and they disproportionately affect low-income communities. So Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, Hyde Park, parts of East Boston. And of course, they disproportionately affect communities and residents of color. And so this has been an ongoing discussion in the city of Boston for decades. And the silver lining is there's been a lot of hearings, even on the council side, with respect to this issue, is that there are sort of a renewed interest by many folks to play a role in finally closing the digital divide. And folks who have been on the front lines with this issue say, one, it is important to keep lifting up that it exists, that it is real, because there are many who did not think it was. Two, now that everyone is paying attention, how might every sector, whether it's philanthropy, whether it is the private sector, the business community, play a role in actually closing the divide? And that not only means working with providers to make sure that they are making sure that every community is connected at an affordable rate. How do we expand the infrastructure possibly of the city of Boston to help with this? How do we go into our senior buildings to make sure they are connected for free? There are ways to do this through our Boston Housing Authority. How do we fund the nonprofit organizations that have been on the ground for a long time, like Tech Goes Home, who not only make sure people are connected, but do the harder work of the technical assistance in the training for our young people and our adults and our teachers to make sure that folks know what they're doing once they have the equipment. And this will have to be addressed immediately because we know there is no going back to normal. Telehealth is going to expand. Access to mental health clinicians and providers is going to expand through a telehealth model. Working remotely. Employers are going to be incorporating these types of models, right? And so it's really critically important that folks are connected and that they have the training and the adequate training. And the city of Boston can be leading in that regard, along with, of course, in partnership with other municipalities in the region.
Right. Thank you. Thanks for that overview. Nasreen, I don't know if to go for a minute. You're not on the screen. Oh, there you are. You're back. Wonderful. Nasreen, you're back with us. We see you again. We lost you for a second, but now you're back.
I have
a
problem in my internet connection.
Oh,
we can hear you.
It's perfectly timed for this question. Yeah.
Exactly. Can I share my
yeah?
Can I share my presentation, please?
What's that? What's that?
Can I share my presentation?
Yeah, if we can do like a brief version of it, because we actually have a lot of questions from the people from the folks out there in the world listening in. So I'd like to get to some of those questions. But yeah, if you want to show us part of your presentation, that would be great.
Okay, thank you. Can you see it? Yeah.
Yeah, I can see it. Great. Yeah, I can see it. Great. Yeah.
Okay, so before then, I would like to give you some background on the Arab society in Israel. Okay, one of 5 citizens in Israel are part of the Arab minority. Okay, we are about 20% of the citizens in the state. And it's important for me to point out that the majority of Arabs in Israel live under the poverty line. Among the Bedouin and the East Jerusalem communities, the level of poverty reach to 75 and even to 80%. And now, because of COVID-19, those numbers have been raised, and now they are much higher. And as we said before, we have 4 education system. I won't say more about this, but it's very important for me to say that the chances that one of my daughters who study in the Arab system meets someone from the ultra-Orthodox education system is almost non-existent, and this alone creates a very divided society. And we don't have to say a lot about the positive correlation that exists between education, and between education and employment. Education is even more important when we talk about minorities who are struggling to fit into the mainstream. Let's talk about Meitzav. The Israeli education system is the Israeli education system is characterized by national and economic gaps. Despite additional budget allocation to Arab education system at the last 5 years, there are still a huge gap that must be closed between Jews and Arabs education systems. And one of the, I don't know if you know the Meitzav, but Meitzav is a test that given nationally to all the children in Israel twice, one at the 5th grade and the second time at the 8th grade. And the result reflects their abilities to abilities in range of topics. And as you can see in the last few years, as the gaps here have begun to close between Arabs and Jews, and in the elementary school, both in math and also in English. But you can see here that when we look at middle school, we see that the gaps are very wide. Although there is an improvement in the matriculation and more Arab students are completing their high school diploma, nevertheless, their grades are still lower, and subjects they study do not provide the same access to higher education system. In recent years, levels of high school dropout have declined. Nevertheless, we see higher rates of dropout among boys, and the Arab students are more likely to drop out than their Jewish counterparts. And COVID only made this worse, unfortunately.
Nasreen, just before we get to the next slide, I was wondering, just because we're short on time and we have a bunch of questions from the audience, can we just maybe just get to the whatever you want us to know most from the presentation, then we'll move on to questions.
I can stop here. It's okay. Everything is very
okay. No, sorry.
So
no, I know. It's on. We're just trying to get. We have just be mindful of people's time. We just have a few more questions to get in. So hold on one second. No, but thanks for that. That's helpful to put everything in context for sure. Maybe just to follow up quickly, the issue of digital divide. What do we know in terms of what Arab students are actually getting with their online education this year? Are they fighting for computers? Only one computer in the house, or cell phones in one house? Like how are they getting access?
Let's start with the fact that that the state of Israel and also the Arab society doesn't know anything about the needs in the field. So people, no one know what is the specific number of the lack of computers at the Arab society. So the Ministry of Education talk about 40,000 computers that need to be provided to the Arab families. And for example, one of the reports talk about 150 computers that need to be provided to Arab families. And so this is the first issue that need to be to map, to map the needs. And to give the students computers, it's not enough. In the Arab villages and in the Arab towns, we have a lot of connection problems. As you could see a few minutes ago, the connection of internet is not that stable. And I'm very gentle words. So this is, unfortunately, this is the situation. And it's a total, it's a very bad situation. A lot of students did not have the chance to study at the last year.
That's, which is staggering to think about. And also I've understood that, some students might be embarrassed about what their home looks like, or there are people they live in a small apartment or a small space and people are walking back and forth and they don't want people to see that. And there's other reasons too, even when the technology works, that they don't want to be, that the technology is problematic. I have a question for both of you from one of our, from Suzanne Robbins. She asks to both panelists, what is the most important thing that would help improve access to quality education where you live? And we'll start with you, Councilor Campbell.
Well, I think in the immediate, with at least the remote learning experience, because Boston sadly has not gotten our kids back in person, and that's a work in progress, but it is closing that digital divide, because we're talking about thousands of students who are currently disconnected. And they're saying it's maybe 5% of, of over 50,000 students in our district, right? So, and who knows if that's the real number, because of what Nasreen was just saying in terms of, do we have a real sense of the scope of the problem because of lack of engagement, frankly, and meaningful engagement with parents. So in the immediate, it is really doing the work on the digital divide. I think there are a whole host of ways, we could immediately shift. There are a whole host of things, and I hesitate to name one thing. I actually put out a plan 2 years ago. I called it Action for Boston Children, keyword action. Because, after 6 months of engaging stakeholders who've been doing this work of trying to close gaps in the city for years, we landed on 4 areas that were all critically important. One was early ed, and really closing the gaps and delivering a high quality early education to our families. And I think everyone is recognizing how critically important that is, including employers in the business community that want to play a greater role. And there's a way the city of Boston can lead in this regard to truly create universal pre-K in the city of Boston. There's a way to do that. 2 was around the changing our assignment process. There is a way with some tweaks here and there that we could change the assignment process to afford families in, say, a Mattapan or Dorchester and other neighborhoods with greater access to a high quality Boston public school without taking away opportunities for others in other neighborhoods. And there's a way to do that meaningfully, overnight. High schools, we talk a lot about our exam high schools. They're excellent, but we do not talk about the other high schools that serve our children. We refer to them as open enrollment high schools, where these institutions, these teachers, these school leaders are tasked with educating our special needs students, those who've just arrived from another country and do not have the human capital or the resources to be successful in their work with delivering a great education to these students. Immediately, we could redesign our high schools in such a way that they are all excellent and create these pathways that I was talking about at the beginning of our conversation to jobs. And as someone recently said, not just pie in the sky, but actual specific pathways where you know what classes you need to take to get a job in a trade, and partner with our community colleges. And then lastly, the district office and the bureaucracy in our central office. It's just too much bureaucracy. We don't do a great job of engaging parents and families. We have a lot of resources that go there, a lot of human capital. The question is, what does everyone do? How do we direct some of those resources and human capital from the district office to the schools, to the school level, and give more authority, more responsibility and power to the teachers and the school leaders who have a better handle on what's happening in their school environments, more authority and power to do their jobs. And I think we're going to see greater outcomes if we sort of get out of the way of their innovation and their ideas and get rid of the top-down approach. Those are 4 key areas that I continue to focus on. And I think we can sort of run these parallel tracks all at the same time.
Interesting. Just a quick follow-up. You mentioned vocational training and passing and working with community colleges. We've gotten a few questions from listeners about vocational trade schools. What role can they play in Boston?
They are going to play a significant role, and they always will. I don't care, you know, when the next pandemic comes, you still need a plumber, an electrician. My stove right now is broken. You know, I'm waiting on someone and some parts. I mean, that is real. And so who do you call? These are high paying jobs. So we've been talking about Madison Park as, you know, let's reimagine Madison Park. We should have more than one Madison Park. We have great examples like Worcester Tech, other institutions in Massachusetts that are great models of what a great technical school looks like. But there's, again, a way to create pathways so that when students are looking to go into these trades or the green economy or HVAC roles and responsibilities, that they get their certifications while they're still in Boston Public Schools. And they can get these certifications if we think outside the box and partner with a Bunker Hill, Roxbury Community College, BFIT, all of these technical institutions that surround our Boston Public Schools, and create these partnerships that community colleges are welcoming. We create those. They are going to be critically important to help our students get jobs of the future, jobs right now. And so I think we need more than one technical institution and several pathways for our students where they leave Boston Public Schools and can immediately go into high paying jobs. And of course, not incur any type of student debt, which is also critically important.
Really nice. Really nice. Yeah. Thank you for that. And Nasreen, can you answer both that question of what is the situation in terms of technical or trade schools in the Arab sector in Israel? And also, if you can wave your magic wand and focus on one sort of key solution, perhaps something even inspired by COVID, what would you focus on?
Okay, I'm gonna make it short. Well, when we talk about solution, I believe that we need solution both for the short and for the long term. We must immediately address the lacking infrastructure and equipment at the Arab society. All those involved, teachers, students, the parents, what you mentioned, the human capital, must be trained in digital skills to enable remoting learning. And finally, content in Arabic must be available, because till today, the majority of the content are only in Hebrew, and you can do it without have accurate and content that the students can understand. That's it.
Right. Great. Thank you. We've also had an interesting question about gender. Before we move to a closing thought from each of you, I'd love to have even a 30-second or 60-second thoughts on gender dynamics in the classroom. What have you seen, Andrea, in Boston that maybe works better for boys or for girls? And what have you seen, Nasreen, in your research? What can we learn about gender dynamics in the classroom and making things better?
Yeah, no, that's a very powerful question, and near and dear. Obviously, I talk about my twin brother Andre, and I'm a former education attorney. That's how I started my career, representing young students in school discipline cases and special needs cases. And what you often see, at least in the discipline context, that boys are treated differently than girls. We see a higher percentage sort of be excluded and disciplined outside of school with suspension or expulsion. There's been some changes at the state level in terms of the laws to prohibit that. I've seen cases where, personally, it was, you're getting in trouble, go to the back of the classroom. My brother and many others, it was, no, you're being expelled, or you're going to a McKinley school, or just being excluded. And it usually does fall along gender lines. And so I think it's just making sure that we're treating both, all genders, frankly, right, the same. And recognizing that every young person is at risk. every young person is going through something, and that the best way to really discipline is using probably more restorative justice models, other models that are proven to actually work, and to get at what is the trauma that is triggering the behavior, what is the social emotional state of the student. And right now, we're probably going to see a lot of behavioral concerns when students come back. And so just adjusting how we discipline students as a whole is critically important. You know, when you think about a dean of discipline or school police officers and the role they're supposed to play, the question is it effective in really helping our students? Because we've all been there, but is it effective in helping our students really sort of get through what they're going through so they can then, of course, get back to the classroom and continue learning? So I think it's about just treating all the same. And I'll just add on the special needs piece, you see a higher number of students of color, boys of color, Black and brown, in substantially separate classrooms, excluded in that way, and overrepresented in that sort of model versus an exclusionary model of teaching students who may have special needs. That's a major disparity that also has to be addressed as well, because it also informs some of the disciplinary practices that are not working.
Right. Wow. It's so interesting what you say, all of it, including the restorative aspect, but also the emotional toll this year will have taken and what school is going to look like next year, and having to deal with like the discipline problems or the emotional issues and the fallout of this trauma.
Yeah. And I'll just add one thing I neglected that I think is critically important is when we look at our LGBTQ youth, you know, we often don't have data points for this population of students. But when we do get some data, it suggests they are absolutely more over-disciplined because of folks who are in the LGBTQ community. They're often bullied. So there is, I think, greater work to do there to get a sense of the scope of the problem, especially as we talk about gender, the scope of the problem and how we have a greater response to students who fit within this category of students who often feel like they have no support, no safe spaces, or clinicians or folks that they can go to. That is critically important and must be at the forefront as well. It's been coming up in a lot of conversations of late.
Okay, interesting. And Nasreen, just like to ask you quickly, your thoughts on sort of how gender plays out in the classroom.
Yeah, I would like to point out an issue that's related to gender. You know, the majority of the males that I know, they dropped out of school as they went to help their families to bring food home. And female, I'm very glad that female continue because they don't have any opportunity to be opportunities to take part at the labor market, and males can work in a very in a low positions that do not need any kind of skills. They work, for example, in building and infrastructure in the job towns, and I believe that we are going to suffer from this phenomenon because I believe that in the long term, there is no need to be worried about females in the Arab society. They are more and more, they know how to build their future and to integrate in the higher education system. But this phenomenon made even all the issue of drop out of school to be, it's the numbers are very, now are very, are much higher that were in the past.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah. And the number of women graduating from university, Arab women are now surpassing the men as university graduates as well. I understand. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we're gonna be summing up now. I feel like there's a lot to cover. There's so much more ground to cover, and I hope we can have an opportunity in the future to talk again. I just want to point out that Nasreen, I'm so sorry that we have to stop your program, your presentation in the middle, but we'd love to share it with the audience as well when they go home. So if that's okay with you, we'd love to share that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I understand, these are very different contexts, and it's very, it gets very mushy, kind of comparing and contrasting, but we are living in this international, global moment of COVID, and there is a lot that sort of binds, whether it's the digital divide or, gender divides. I'd just like to ask you each, as a closing remark, sort of what you think of is sort of in a hopeful way we've learned from this moment, and what you hope we can take from this moment going forward. Councilor Campbell, I'll ask you first.
Yeah, no, I mean, I appreciate the conversation because, there are best practices everywhere, including in our international countries and in partnerships, right? That can help us all sort of do better with respect to the issues we're grappling with. And I think the silver lining and what keeps me optimistic and hopeful, I'm naturally that way because of my faith, I will say, but what keeps me optimistic is really thinking about the possibilities, right? When we sort of coming out of COVID is that we have an opportunity to reimagine every system and to really begin to think about innovation in a different way, to maybe take some risk. I know government doesn't usually like to, but if we're going to really solve for persistent inequities, we have to be inclined to take a little risk. And this, I think, is the time to do that. To say, the way in which we're engaging families wasn't working before. But now there are teachers, for example, who are having office hours all day. And, while their parent is at home with their child, they're tuning in, between 9 and 5, and so family engagement is looking differently. So what are we learning from all of these things we're seeing that could allow us to be better at what we do in delivering services, engaging our families, and of course, in closing the gaps in education. And so I'm excited for that reimagining, for thinking outside the box, and to pushing the limits on what innovation looks like in the city of Boston, so that we finally close the gaps in ensuring that every single family in this city has access to an excellent education. It is possible, it is doable. And of course, thank you again for having me, because it requires this type of partnership and connectivity to get it done.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. That was really inspiring. Nasreen, what do you see sort of looking forward as sort of policies that we can take with us from this very hard school of knocks of this year that we learned from?
Well, the challenges we face now during COVID-19 provide an opportunity to build a new chapter in the relationship between Arab society and the State of Israel, and also with the Jewish community. Because closing the gaps in education can go a long way to closing gaps in employment and income, and can help diminish existing pluralization in Israeli society. And I'll stop here. Thank you so much for having me, and Councilor, so inspiring. So
thank you. Pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, you were two amazing women. I hope we can get you guys together either in Boston or Israel sometime in the future. And thank you for all of you. Yeah, yeah. We'll defrost you here because it was like almost 80 degrees here today. But and for everyone's excellent questions, I'm sorry we couldn't get to everyone's questions. I know people were really very interested and engaged, and a lot of responses, to your family stories as well. So I'd like to thank you for sharing those. And I think we'll be sending those who came a link to Nasreen's presentation, and also some other links for more information and more conversation and dialogue. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.